Chapter 19 of Brenda, Her School, and Her Club. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, visit LibriVox.org. Recording by iBones. Brenda, Her School, and Her Club by Helen Leah Reed. Chapter 19. It is never the easiest thing in the world to settle down to work after the holidays, and even Julia for a day or two found herself a little dreamy, with her thoughts constantly going back to the many pleasant things of that Christmas week. But it was not as hard for her as for her cousins to resume the regular routine. She had a more definite aim than they, with the prospect of college examinations not so very far away. Brenda had not yet made up her mind to give her approval to her cousin's studying Greek, and she did not take the trouble to contradict Belle and Frances Pounder when they said that it must be a very disagreeable thing to have a cousin who intended to be a teacher. It is true that neither Belle nor Frances was thoroughly informed as to Julia's intentions, but they never needed very definite facts on which to base their theories. Consequently, when they were at a loss for a subject of conversation, they were in the habit of discussing Julia's peculiarities. Other persons did not find Julia peculiar. To older people, she seemed an especially well-mannered girl, with a delightful vein of thoughtfulness that was not too often met in young girls. She had become also a decided favorite with the brothers of her school friends, to an extent that sometimes seemed surprising. For Julia was not an extremely pretty girl, and she was not half so well informed on sports and games as were the girls who had lived all their lives in Boston. But she had a way of listening attentively to whatever any boy happened to be saying to her, and the questions that she asked always showed an unusual degree of attention, an attention that anyone could see was not a mere pretense. Philip Blair had already begun to confide to her a larger share of his college woes than he would have confided to his placid sister Edith. For Edith had an uncomfortable habit of forgetting just what was to be kept secret, and though Philip had no very dark secrets, there were still little things that he preferred not to have told. Julia was also very ready to help Nora's younger brothers in their lessons, and as Harry Gostar said, "There isn't another girl Nora knows that could help a fellow with his Greek exercises, and even if she hasn't studied Greek any longer than I have, she has learned more than enough to show me where I make mistakes in these beastly old conjugations." There was probably some jealousy in the feeling of Frances and Belle towards Julia, but jealousy was not a strong motive with Brenda. In her case, there had been little more than pettishness in her first attitude towards her cousin, the pettishness of a spoiled child. Yet this pettishness, which left it to itself would have seemed of little account, hardly worth noticing, when fanned by Belle and Frances took on the aspect of jealousy. In consequence of this feeling, Julia had been made at times very uncomfortable, though no one had ever known her to say a word to Brenda in resentment. Sometimes she found it very hard not to say a word when she heard the four rushing upstairs on the afternoons of the club meetings. Strange though it may seem, no invitation had yet been given her to assist in the work for the bazaar, even though, although all the other girls realized that the success of the Roses' Christmas tree had been largely due to her. Perhaps it was just as well that Julia had no opportunity to inspect the things that they were preparing for the bazaar, for even after these many weeks of work there was hardly a single finished article. Belle's centerpiece was so elaborate that a whole afternoon showed hardly more than a single finished leaf, or one exquisitely wrought blossom. "If anyone would pay you for your time, Belle," Nora said mischievously one day, "we should have money enough to send one of the Rosa children to Europe." "You'd better talk, Nora," Belle replied. "Your Afghan isn't half done either, and an Afghan does not begin to be so fussy as a centerpiece, and it isn't even artistic, or—" "Oh, well," Nora replied, "this is not the only thing that I've done. I keep it to work on here, but I have finished a small shawl at home and a pair of baby shoes, and I'm going to do any number of things besides." "Ah," said Belle, tossing her head, "you won't find me working myself to death over a bazaar. I think one afternoon a week is a great deal to give to any poor family, for that is what it amounts to. And you know that I don't care much about those roses anyway." "Oh, Belle!" cried Edith, looking shocked. "No, indeed I don't, and I am sure that Brenda does not care half as much as she pretends. Why, Edith, as for that, you yourself never go down to the North End to see them." "I can't. My mother won't let me go into dirty streets or into tenement houses." "Oh, if you cared very much, you'd find some way to go there occasionally. You could drive." Edith looked so uncomfortable at this suggestion that Nora, on whom usually fell the duty of taking up the cudgels, exclaimed, "You know that Edith was very generous at Christmas, and that she is ready to do ever so much more for the Roses, and it isn't a bit fair to speak in that way." Belle discreetly said nothing further, for she had learned that when Nora assumed this positive tone, Brenda was apt to go over on her side, and then Belle herself would be so in the minority as to be obliged to seem an unpopular person. And if there was one thing in the world that she dreaded, it was to be considered unpopular. So, trimming her sails, she said, "Why, how silly you are, Nora! You know that I was only in fun. Of course we are all interested in the Roses, and I only wished that I could do 2 or 3 centerpieces for the bazaar, but I'm always so busy at this season." "You busy, Belle?" cried Nora. "Who ever heard of such a thing? You are just the idlest person I know." "Indeed I am not," was the answer. "I have to do all the errands for my family, and half my clothes are made in the house, and we always have such stupid seamstresses that—" "I should say so, Belle. I do think that you have had some of the ugliest clothes lately that I have seen this winter," interrupted Nora, rather unceremoniously. Belle reddened very deeply at this speech, for as a matter of fact she was extremely sensitive on the subject of her clothes. Unlike Brenda or Edith, she never had the privilege of going to a fine costumer, nor could she even employ the dressmaker who made some of the gowns worn by others of her set of friends. The circumstances in her family were such that she could not gratify her taste in dress. She must wear this thing or that thing that her grandmother had selected, or must have something of her mother's altered to the present fashion for girls. However skilful the alterations, she felt as if she were in some way disgraced. Now, to tell the truth, Belle herself had so much natural taste that only a very severe critic could see anything to criticize in her dress, and a sensible person watching the 2 girls would have said it was much better for a young girl to be brought up with the somewhat economical habits that had to be Belle's, rather than to have the rather too elegant clothes and the many changes of costume which Mrs. Blair seemed to prefer for Edith. But girls will be girls, and Belle's great grievance was that when fawn brown, for example, was the fashionable spring shade, she had to wear a gown of stone gray, because somewhere in the cedar chests in her grandmother's attic there was a stone gray thibert, ample enough to cut over into a spring gown for her. As to hats, neither her mother nor her grandmother approved of her having her hats trimmed at a milliner's. In consequence, after her mother had put on a hat a simple trimming, such as she approved for herself, Belle would spend her first spare afternoon in ripping it all off in order to retrim it. Indeed, she usually spent not one afternoon, but several, in this operation, and even ventured to lay out her own pocket money in little ornaments, or in ribbons, that she thought would add to the appearance of the hat. In the same way, she was able, too, to make slight alterations in the appearance of her gowns, and sometimes the changes were improvements. At other times, what she had considered a genuine addition to the style of her garment, or hat, to other eyes seemed only queer, or in schoolgirl parlance, weird. When, therefore, Nora said that she considered Belle's clothes of the present winter the ugliest she had seen, she touched a tender chord. In the first place, Belle had had a strong dislike for the coat and hat, which her mother and grandmother had selected for her, and in the second place, she thought that she had improved the appearance of her costume as a whole by entirely altering the style of her winter hat. For she had twisted the front to the back, had added a deep blue bow to the trimming, and she believed that altogether she had accomplished wonders. At Nora's speech, the tears came to her eyes, and the heedless Brenda, who was not herself always careful of feelings, broke forth indignantly, "I do think, Nora, that you might be careful what you say. You know that Belle dresses as well as she can, and I think that she always looks well. I wish that I could trim hats." "Oh, Brenda, it is a good thing that you can't, for if you could, you never would have a thing to wear. You can do fancy work, but you haven't finished a thing yet for the bazaar." While Nora was talking, Belle had been folding up her work, and in a moment more she was putting on her hat and coat. "You're not going now?" cried Brenda. "Oh, don't go. You're not mad at Nora, are you?" "Oh, no," answered Belle, with the air of injured innocence. "Oh, no, but I think that I ought to be going. I did not mean to stay the whole afternoon." "Oh, don't go," urged Edith. "If you'll wait half an hour, I will go with you, but I must finish this piece of drawn work." But Belle continued to put on her outer wraps, and in a few minutes she had bidden the others good-bye. As a matter of fact, Belle was deeply offended, and she knew that if she had stayed much longer with her friends, she would have been driven to express herself strongly. Now, a general quarrel was a thing to be dreaded, and she knew that it would be unwise to risk it. Belle was certainly a sensible girl, and what she now did was really the best thing under the circumstances. Left to themselves, the 3 other girls let their tongues move freely. It was something new for the rather loquacious Belle to go off without a word, as if in some way she had been vanquished. It was the very best thing that she could have done for herself. "Really, Nora, I don't see how you could speak in that way to Belle. I am sure that she feels very badly." "Well, she is awfully conceited about her clothes, and sometimes she does look so queer." "But you shouldn't say so to her face." "Better to her face than behind her back." "I don't know," rejoined Edith. "There are some things that it is just as well not to say at all. Belle has a right to wear whatever kind of hat she likes." "Oh, Edith," responded Nora, "you are altogether too fair. I am tired of having Belle find fault with everyone else as if she were just perfect herself. For my own part, "Well, Nora," said Brenda, "you ought not to say anything to Belle when she is in my house. I happen to know that she is very sensitive about her clothes. In the first place, her mother will never let her have what she wants." "No, it's her grandmother," interrupted Edith. "She really does have a hard time, and it isn't fair to criticize her." "No," added Brenda, "it is not." "Well, Brenda," said Nora, "you ought not to say anything. You make Belle awfully mad sometimes by what you say. I heard you telling her the other day that you think she'd just hate that winter coat that she had been wearing. The fur is so very unbecoming. And you asked her why she didn't have a chinchilla collar and muff. She won't quarrel with you, because there are so many little things that you can do for her." "There, there," cried Edith, who saw that neither Brenda nor Nora was in an amiable frame of mind. "Don't let us bicker. Anyone would think that we were all enemies instead of the inseparable 4. "Oh, Edith, we can't all be as amiable as you," responded Nora. "But really, I am a little sorry that I offended Belle, for I know that she has a rather hard time at home. But I do wish that she would not put on such superior airs, and I do wish that she would not wear her hats hind side before. Sometimes I almost hate to go out with her." "Why, Nora, I never heard of such a thing. I did not know that you attached the least importance to appearances. Besides, I thought that you always wanted to make every one comfortable in her feelings. It seems strange that you should have been so awfully thoughtless towards Belle." "I dare say that you are perfectly correct," responded Nora. "You usually are, Edith Blair, and I haven't had a doubt that I shall go down on my knees tomorrow at recess and apologize to Belle and to everyone else whom I have ever offended. But I say that we have had enough of this exchange of compliments for today. Let us put up our work and talk about something else. Why, see here, Belle has left her centerpiece behind her." "Oh, give it to me," cried Brenda. "I will put it away." And she took it from Nora's hands. "We shouldn't have had this fuss, should we," said Edith, "if Julia had been working with us today?" "You don't call this a fuss," rejoined Nora, "only a slight misunderstanding." Now, in spite of her outspokenness, Nora was really a very fair-minded young person, or perhaps I ought to say because of it. Those who express themselves plainly often hurt the feelings of their friends, and not all of them have the courage to admit that they have been wrong. It does require some courage to go to a girl who is in the habit of justifying all her own words and deeds to tell her that you yourself have been wrong. Yet this was just what Nora did a day or two later, when she began to reflect on the criticism she had made in the matter of Belle's clothes. She was surprised herself at the graciousness with which Belle received her apology. But this was one of the cases, rather exceptional to be sure, in which Nora was decidedly in the wrong. Belle, therefore, could afford to be magnanimous. After this, Nora was much more careful about criticizing anyone, for it was her general aim in life to follow as closely as she could the Golden Rule. End of Chapter 19, recording by iBones, Brooklyn, New York.